The air underground always carried the same smell: old metal, damp concrete. The ghost of 10,000 strangers pressed together over decades, breathing and sweating and moving through tunnels that never once saw the sun. Marcus Hale knew that smell better than most. Not because he rode the subway often, but because when you lose your sight, every smell becomes a map. Every sound becomes a wall or a doorway.
Thank you.
Every breath of recycled air tells you something a pair of eyes might overlook entirely. He stood on the platform of the Delancey Street station at 11:47 on a Wednesday night, one hand resting lightly on the leather harness of a black German shepherd named Rook. The dog sat perfectly still beside him, 78 pounds of muscle and quiet intelligence, amber eyes scanning the platform with a calm that almost looked bored. Almost. Rook was never truly bored. He was always working. Marcus had trained him that way. Or rather, Marcus and Rook had trained each other, in the particular way that two beings who have shared genuine danger come to understand one another without words. Marcus was 41 years old. He had a broad, still face that carried the kind of stillness that doesn't come from peace, but from discipline. Deep lines ran from the corners of his unseeing eyes. His hair was close-cropped and going silver at the temples. He wore a dark jacket, worn at the elbows, and dark jeans and boots that had walked soil on 3 different continents. He carried no cane. He didn't need one. He had Rook, and he had the memory of his body, a body that had once moved through pitch-black insertion zones, navigating by sound and touch, and training so deep it had become something close to instinct. The platform was almost empty, just a woman at the far end, earbuds in, not looking up, a maintenance worker somewhere behind the yellow safety line, dragging something heavy across tile, and the distant, hollow groan of a train somewhere in the dark tunnel to the north, still minutes away. Marcus exhaled slowly. He had been at a veterans support group meeting that evening. Over in the Lower East Side Community Center with the folding chairs and the bad fluorescent lighting, and the coffee that tasted like it, had been brewed sometime during the Clinton administration. He went every other Wednesday. He didn't speak much, but he listened. That was something he had always been good at, listening. The group counselor, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Ewan, had once told him that his presence alone seemed to steady the room. He hadn't known what to say to that, so he had said nothing, which was the most honest response he had. The sight had gone 4 years ago, not in combat, which people always assumed. It had gone in a car accident on a Tuesday morning in Virginia, on a road he had driven 100 times, in rain that came suddenly and without mercy. He had walked out of the hospital 3 weeks later, blinking at a world he could no longer see. And he had stood in the parking lot and breathed the outside air for what felt like 20 minutes before he could make himself move. The adjustment had been the hardest thing he had ever done, and Marcus Hale had done extraordinarily hard things. 17 years as a Navy SEAL, 4 combat deployments. Operations he could never describe to anyone, in places that didn't appear on the briefing maps that lower clearance personnel ever saw. He had been a quiet professional in the truest sense of that phrase, not because it sounded good on a plaque, but because the silence had been the job, the discretion had been the point. And then came the rain and the Tuesday, and the road he'd driven 100 times. Now he stood on a subway platform in Lower Manhattan, waiting for the F train, with his dog beside him and his whole world contained within a radius of sound and scent, and the gentle pressure of Rook's harness against his palm. He was not a man who spent much time feeling sorry for himself. That wasn't discipline. That was just who he was. But there were nights, quiet nights, late nights, nights exactly like this one, when the weight of everything he used to be pressed down on him in ways he didn't have words for. When he stood somewhere ordinary, and ordinary felt enormous. when he thought about the man who had moved through darkness with purpose and precision, and compared him to the man standing still on a subway platform, waiting, depending, adjusting. He did not let those thoughts linger. He recognized them the way you recognize a neighbor you don't particularly like. Then he let them pass. Rook shifted slightly beside him. His body language changed almost imperceptibly, but Marcus felt it through the harness. A subtle tension, a new alertness. Marcus tilted his head, listened, footsteps, multiple sets. Coming down the far stairwell. Young, heavy-soled shoes. The particular cadence of people who want to be heard, who walk loud on purpose, who use sound as a form of territory. There were 4 of them. He tracked them by sound as they moved onto the platform, laughing too loud for the hour. The hollow pop of a spray can being shaken. One of them said something and the others laughed in that sharp, performative way that means it isn't really about the joke. Marcus didn't move, didn't reach for anything, didn't change his posture. He stood the way he always stood, still, centered, hands relaxed, weight slightly forward on the balls of his feet in a way that was so practiced it looked like nothing at all. Rook made no sound. But his head had turned precisely 20 degrees in the direction of the 4 newcomers. They clocked Marcus within 30 seconds. He heard them adjust. The dynamic shift in a group of young men when they identify someone they've decided is an easy mark is something that has its own particular sound. A quickening, a closing of formation. The way the laughter changes from genuine performance to anticipation. One of them called out, young voice, maybe 19. Blind man. Marcus did not respond. Their footsteps closed the distance. 3 of them drifted to form a loose arc. The 4th, the one who'd spoken, came directly forward and stopped about 4 feet away. You got some change, blind man, for the train. Silence. Then, from somewhere deeper in the tunnel, the distant moan of the approaching train. He can't hear either, another one said, and they laughed. He can hear, the first one said, the leader. His voice was lower now, not performing for the others but talking directly, which was somehow more deliberately threatening. He just thinks if he doesn't answer we're gonna go away. He took another step forward. We're not. Rook did not growl, he did not lunge. He simply repositioned his body by a few inches, placing himself more squarely between Marcus and the speaker, and fixed his amber gaze on the young man with an attention so pure and so absolute that it was, by several accounts from people who had seen it before, genuinely unsettling. Whoa, someone said. That dog's not gonna do anything, the leader said, though his voice had gone half a shade less certain. Blind man's got a seeing eye dog. That's all. Check his pockets, said the one on the far left, and here was the moment, the particular crossing of a line, not posturing anymore, not performance. The lean from cruelty into something that had weight and consequence. The leader reached forward to grab Marcus by the jacket. What happened next took approximately 3.5 seconds. Marcus moved, not frantically, not with the wild energy of panic or adrenaline overload. He moved with the compressed precision of someone who had rehearsed violence so many times that it had become quiet and mechanical, and almost gentle in its economy. His left hand came up and redirected the grab. His right elbow came through at an angle that made the young man's knees buckle. He controlled the descent. The leader hit the platform ground not with a crash, but with a firm, guided drop that said clearly, I could have done this much harder. He held the young man's wrist at a specific angle. Just specific enough. Don't, Marcus said, one word. The other 3 had gone absolutely silent. Rook stood exactly where he was, head up, eyes moving, watching all of them. The train was closer now. Its sound filled the tunnel, building toward arrival. The 3 standing ones exchanged looks. One of them had his hand inside his hoodie pocket. Take it out slow, Marcus said, his voice still that same flat, even tone, and set it on the ground. And then tell your friend to stop thinking about what he's thinking about. because whatever he's thinking about will not end the way he expects. A long pause, long enough that it had mass. The hand came out of the pocket, empty. The young man's jaw was tight. Smart, Marcus said. He helped the leader up, not theatrically, not to make a point. He just helped him stand, with a kind of matter-of-fact care that was somehow more disorienting than anything else. The leader was breathing hard. He was looking at Marcus with an expression nobody there could fully name. Not quite anger, not quite fear, something more complicated and less comfortable than either. "What are you?" the leader said, and his voice had lost every layer of performance. It was just a young man's voice now. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and produced his wallet. He opened it and took out a transit card, just a transit card. "I was on my way home," he said. "That's all I was doing." He turned back toward the edge of the platform. Rook moved with him, smooth and synchronized, like a shadow that had learned to anticipate. One of the four cleared his throat. "Your dog," he started. "His name is Rook," Marcus said without turning around. "He's 12. He's a good dog." The train arrived in a wash of light and compressed air and mechanical sound. The doors slid open. But then, one of the young men stepped forward. Not the leader. The one who had been hanging at the back the whole time, quieter than the others. He was looking at Marcus with something different in his face. Not threat, something else. He was looking at the dog's harness. At the patch on Marcus's jacket that was partially visible when the jacket had shifted during the altercation. The patch was small, the kind that didn't advertise itself, a trident and an eagle. Small text. The young man had seen that patch before. "Sir," he said. His voice was different from any voice he'd used in the last 10 minutes, completely different. "Sir, were you in the teams?" The train doors stayed open. Marcus paused. "My father was," the young man said. "Petty Officer 2nd Class Raymond Osa. He served in the early 2000s. The young man stopped, started again. "He died 3 years ago. He didn't talk much about it. But he had that exact patch, kept it in a box. He showed it to me once." The platform was very quiet. Marcus turned around slowly. His unseeing eyes settled in the direction of the young man's voice, with a precision that didn't come from sight. It came from 30 years of learning exactly where sound lives in a given space. "Raymond Osai," Marcus said. The name came out of him differently than his other words had. It didn't announce anything. It just landed like a stone dropping into deep water. The young man's breath caught. "Big man," Marcus said. "Broad shoulders, laughed loud, from Accra originally but grew up in the Bronx." A pause. "He called himself Ray." Nobody called him Raymond except his mother. The young man's eyes had filled. He was 19 years old, maybe 20, and he was standing on a subway platform in the middle of the night, and he was trying very hard not to fall apart. "You knew him," the young man said. It wasn't quite a question. "I served with him," Marcus said. 2 deployments. He was one of the finest people I have ever stood next to in my life. In any kind of light, in any kind of situation. The train doors chimed, closed, left. Nobody moved to catch it. The leader was standing very still now, his earlier performance so thoroughly dissolved that he looked younger than he probably was. He was watching his friend, and watching this man with the quiet face and the dog with the amber eyes. And something in the situation had pushed him somewhere he clearly didn't have full language for yet. "What's your name?" Marcus asked. "Kofi," the young man said. "Kofi Osai." "Your father talked about you," Marcus said. "He carried a picture, younger version of you but the same. He talked about you the way people talk about the thing they're working hardest to protect." Kofi's jaw was trembling. He pressed his lips together hard. He looked at the ground for a moment and then back up. "I didn't know," Kofi said quietly. "I didn't know what he did, not exactly. After he died, the people who came to the house, the military people, they talked about service but they were careful with what they said." My mom thinks it's because they still can't say everything. That's likely true, Marcus said. Kofi stopped. He gestured vaguely at the others, at the platform, at the night, at some larger shape of things he couldn't articulate. I don't know what I've been doing. He couldn't finish it. He didn't need to. Marcus was quiet for a moment. The tunnel air moved around them, that constant underground breath that comes from systems far too large and old to feel. He worried, Marcus said, not in a way that made him afraid. Ray didn't do fear the way most people do, but he worried about you specifically. He used to say, and I'm telling you this because it's true and because you should hear it. He used to say that Kofi is the one who feels everything too much, which means he's the one who could do something real with it someday, if he doesn't let it pull him sideways first. The silence that followed that was one of those silences that becomes its own kind of sound, heavy and clean at the same time. Rook, who had been sitting motionlessly through all of this, now walked slowly to the end of his harness and extended his nose toward Kofi. He sniffed the young man's hand once, then he sat again. Kofi looked at the dog for a long time. He let me, Kofi said, half to himself. He does that sometimes, Marcus said. He decides. The leader of the group, who had been silent for several minutes now, spoke. His voice was low. Yo, Kofi, I didn't know, man, about your pops. I didn't know any of that. It's fine, Kofi said, but the words were automatic. His attention was still on Marcus. What happened to your eyes? Kofi asked. He asked it directly, without cruelty, the way a person asks when they've run out of room for pretense. Car accident, Marcus said. Virginia, 4 years ago. Kofi exhaled. That's not fair. No, Marcus agreed, it's not. Do you miss it? The work? Marcus considered the question the way he considered everything, fully, without rushing. I miss being useful in the way I understood, he said. I miss the clarity of that kind of purpose. But I've learned that there are other forms of useful that I was too narrow to see before. He paused. I didn't choose to learn that, but I learned it. Another train was coming. Somewhere in the tunnel, the air was shifting again. Kofi looked at Marcus, really looked, in the way you look at someone when you understand suddenly that this moment will stay with you, that it has already become the kind of memory that doesn't fade. I'm sorry, Kofi said, for he gestured at the platform, for what happened. I know you are, Marcus said. He said it without condescension, just directly. He reached into his jacket one more time and produced a small card. He held it out in the direction of Kofi's voice, and Kofi stepped forward and took it. There's a Veterans Family Support Program, Marcus said, for people who lost someone, not just for grief, for understanding who they were. Some of Ray's teammates, people who knew him, they've spoken at these sessions. You might hear things that help you build a picture, a real one. Kofi looked at the card. You think I should go, he said. I think Ray's someone who feels everything too much, Marcus said, which means you already know the answer to that. The train came. Its light filled the tunnel entrance, and then the train itself arrived in that wall of sound and wind. The doors opened. Marcus put his hand back on Rook's harness. The dog stood smoothly, already orienting. They stepped onto the train. Before the doors closed, Marcus heard Kofi's voice one last time through the narrowing gap. Thank you, Kofi said. The doors shut. The train moved. Marcus sat in the nearly empty car with Rook's head resting against his knee, the dog's weight warm and constant and familiar. The car rattled and hummed and moved through the underground dark, the way it had moved through underground dark for decades before either of them existed. He thought about Ray Osai. About a Tuesday afternoon somewhere in a desert that doesn't have an official name in any document that will ever be declassified. When Ray had laughed so loud at something so small that everyone in the squad had laughed too, not even knowing why, just because the sound of it was impossible not to follow. That laugh, big and uncomplicated. A man who carried hard things and still found room for that laugh. He thought about a boy who lost his father and didn't know what to do with the space that left. How that space fills with things that aren't good enough for it. How a person can disappear into their own grief until the grief becomes the whole personality. He thought about a subway platform and a moment that could have gone in a dozen different directions and only went in this one. He rested his hand gently on Rook's broad back. The dog sighed. A long, slow exhale of complete animal contentment. The train carried them north through the dark. There is a kind of encounter that does not announce itself. It arrives looking like a threat, or a delay, or a mistake. It arrives in the wrong place at the wrong hour, surrounded by the wrong circumstances. And if you're not paying attention, if you let the surface of things be the whole story, you'll miss what it actually is. What it actually is, sometimes, is a door. A man who cannot see stands in the underground with a dog who trusts him completely. A young man who cannot grieve stands on a platform he didn't mean to turn into anything. And between them, for a few minutes, something passes that neither one would have been able to plan for or predict. Some things only happen in the dark. Only in the tunnels where the light doesn't reach. Where people who would never find each other in ordinary daylight are pressed together by circumstance and chance, and the simple fact of the last train being 7 minutes away. Ray Osai carried a photograph of his son. He carried a patch in a box at home. He carried 2 deployments worth of things he could never fully say, and still he laughed the way the sun comes out, and still he told the man beside him that his boy felt everything too much. He was not wrong about the boy, and maybe, just maybe, he was not wrong about what that could become. Rook exhaled again. Outside the windows, the tunnel walls slid past in the dark, marked here and there by small lights that went by too quickly to look like anything but streaks. Marcus Hale rode the train home. Eyes closed, listening.